This tutorial is for research and outlining. Before we go on with this, I want to visit just a couple of minutes about the purpose of theory essays. Some people might say, oh, it's all this airy-fairy stuff. Who cares? Who could possibly care less? Now, obviously, if I'm writing a position paper about to evaluate different cures for diseases, that's got validity, doesn't it? Because I'm going to look at several proposed cures, and I'm going to evaluate them, and then I'm going to indicate which cure I think might work best. There are essays that propose funding for this or that, and I'm going to look at a cause, and I'm going to explore it, and I'm going to see how much funding has been made available, and I'm going to propose that legislation be initiated immediately to fund this or that cause. Maybe I'm going to write an essay where I take a stand against something. Something's happening and I write an essay that is a direct position paper where I'm going to say I say yes or I say no to this particular trend or whatever I see. Exposés where I'm going to expose conspiracies, expose the wrongdoers. Those are obviously meaningful. Advocates. I'm going to write an essay where I advocate for an underserved population. I see people that aren't getting a fair shake, and I'm going to write an essay I'm going to persuade a community of people to vote, to donate, to do whatever it is that I want them to do in a persuasive essay. Maybe I'm going to write another one that evaluates and proposes parenting styles. Those you can see, all those have clear. And then we look at my project, which is to postulate a theory about Woodstock, a concert from 1969. And I can see where one might think, who cares? What's the difference? People write essays on the existence of God, their theory of evolution, their theory of this and that and the other, and I can understand why a reader might think, oh, who cares? Well, here's the reason that those are valid essay position papers. Because in an enlightened society, in a society that considers its own actions and its own course of destiny, it is acceptable and necessary to think beyond what can be seen and think about what is important, what matters. What is the significance of what can be seen? The idea of a higher order, the idea of something else that created this planet that I live on, this galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy where I live. All of those ponderances are worthy of discourse. And so I look at this grass that is Max Yasgur's farm, and I think, okay, well, I'm going to take on this essay, and I'm going to write an essay about the theory of how this all happened. And I think, okay, how did this turn into this? And a few days into researching this one, this is the dumbest idea I ever had. I can't even figure out a way to explain this little many people, let alone this mass of humanity. I can't find any way to explain why an estimated 3 million people are on highways from New York to the south to everywhere from California and all states to the west, Canada, Maine, states to the north, and were willing to get into traffic jams just trying to get here. How am I going to explain that? And so I feel overwhelmed for a minute, and I feel overwhelmed no matter what it is that I'm going to evaluate. But I'm not going to give up. So I start with trying to figure out what I'm dealing with. I need to get the facts. I don't care what I'm writing about. I need to get the facts about what I'm dealing with. So I'm trying to calculate this audience, and believe me when I say that every single site I looked to had a different number. So I went and found this little math site, and I asked some people some questions, And all of them, of course, came back and said it's impossible to calculate. You can take one section of the crowd, but then you can't take the sections that were out in the woods, or the sections of the campers that were in town, or the people on the highways and the byways and the freeways and the farm roads. You can't possibly make that calculation. So I find somebody who is willing to take everything that we know, that I can find that's a fact, and come up with an average. So one might say, well, okay, Summer of Love concerts started in 1967. This is 1969. Those concerts were well orchestrated and had lots of security problems, but they existed and people were very popular. And the events were very popular and people went. So now I have to say, okay, well, I still have to figure out what it is that I'm dealing with here in comparison to the other festivals that were happening around the town. So I take those averages that I have paid somebody a little bit of money. Really, they wanted it for the fun, but I insisted on paying for their time. Paid them a little bit of money to come up with those averages. And then I realized there is no way on earth I'm ever going to research and find a graph that is going to show me where Woodstock fits in with those other festivals. Is this a big deal? And nobody can ever possibly understand. I don't understand numbers. When people say 3 trillion, all I see is 3. When people said there were 1 million people there, I have no context for that in my head. So I like to write. Remember, when I write, I am loyal to my reader. I don't want the reader to have to fill in any blanks. That's why I'm a stickler for things like, well, there were a lot of people there. How many is a lot? Many people came. How many is many? You're making the reader figure out what you mean by those vague terms. So I've got to hold myself to that standard. See, there's people back in here too. There's people all back down over here camping. This is just a part of it. It goes on way back over here. So I go to Fiverr, Fiverr.com, one of my favorite sites, and I hire a guy for $10 to make me the graph. And here's what the graph looks like. This figure, that right below it, I indicate what the figure shows. These totals are estimates based on reports, aerial images, and sales, and include patrons within the venue, outside the venue, and en route to the venue. This Isle of Wight, which had a large population, it's a very enclosed population, so there weren't hordes and crowds of people trying to get there. People either came or they didn't come. It was a nice festival, no doubt about it, a nice festival. But nothing can compare to this. And because I don't have a context for numbers, I certainly have a context for pretty pictures, and I can see how the population increased, and then I can look over here to see what the festivals were. Now my question still is, and I haven't completed this outline, I'm not sure exactly where to put this. This, in my opinion, is the wow factor. And I'm still not exactly sure where in the outline to put this. So let's go back and take a look at the outline. I've put the outline that I have so far all in side-by-side pages so that we can see the look of the entire essay. So as you may recall, we have an introduction, and this is obviously overwritten. You can see the introduction paragraph is only going to contain 8 or 9 sentences, and maybe you can push it to 10 sentences. But it's way overwritten if it's beyond that. And look at everything I have in this introduction. That's all the introduction. Now, that's fine. I would rather overwrite than underwrite and have to go back out and research something. So I can see that I've added a great deal of content here, and I'm going to go back in a minute and talk about this thesis statement, which I have underlined here. So I move on, and this is the next section, which for every single essay is the definition section. The reader doesn't know anything about this. I can assume that maybe the reader has heard that there was a concert called Woodstock, but they don't know anything. It's my job to make sure my reader is never confused, that my reader is always interested and is following my chain of logic. So, if you remember when we first came up with this definition section, I had a lot of little things like this. The odds of an event happening. Nobody cares. It's not important. If anything, maybe this is where the graph will go. The cost, the projected of Woodstock, okay, fine. It's information. The location is very important, and that is explained later on in the essay, and it's explained even down in my theory how important that location was. And then from there we go on to signs of the time, and that's got a great deal of information in it. So for right now, I'm going to put that bar graph right there. These are the promoters, and I'm not sure that it's going to go there, but I want to put it in somewhere I can move it around later. It's just enormous, isn't it? But it has to be. And I can't make it smaller and make the reader have to take out a magnifying glass and figure out what these things say. It's going to have to be a big, prominent image. That's why it's kind of tough to figure also where it's going to fit. But I agree with you that it does need to go somewhere near the beginning of the essay. I'm going to leave it like that for right now, knowing that I'm going to make it bigger later on, so I have to consider where it goes in the essay because it's a big image, and so we have to make sure that I know. This information about how much it cost basically is irrelevant, but it does show the grandiose nature of what happened. So I'm going to leave it in there until I find a reason to take it out. Okay, so now I move on to the next pages. This is signs of the time. Now, you all, this is one thing I want to point out right here to you. This is why I set a timer, because I'm writing down signs of the time, and this is a great deal of research, obviously, especially the Vietnam War. And while I'm going on and I'm talking about and I'm writing about and researching, I'm learning as I go. When I research something, maybe I put it in here. If I don't, I'll show you where I do put it. And so I'm over here and I'm looking at the counterculture, and I get off into the Kent State situation. And before I know it, I'm in Kent State. I'm getting an image. I'm formatting it. And I went, this is not about Kent State. And I just went, oh man. But here's the good news. I had set my timer for 10 minutes. So after 10 minutes, I got back on course because I get interested. And then I get off the topic. So this is all the information, signs of the time, leading up to and trying to explain this. We are, throughout this entire essay, trying to explain this. And the explanation for this is only partially available through these statistics, through these ticket sales, through the fence, through the traffic. There's a whole different higher purpose that would make something go from this to this. And so, and as you can see, this is overwritten. This is a whole lot more about the war than the reader really needs to know, because we don't want to get to a point in this essay where the reader says, am I reading about the Vietnam War or am I reading about Woodstock? So I'll have to edit this, but I'd rather have it too much than not enough and not have facts. So it's much easier for me to go through here and take out what I really don't need than it is to try and go, oh man, where was it that I found that? Okay. Then we're talking about Apollo 11, and I don't need these assassinations. I need to put that in there probably, but it's, I don't know. See, I'm getting so far off in here. And that's the beauty of an outline. Do you see how I can see everything that's going on before I actually ever write the essay? And when I get ready to write the essay, it's take this, copy and paste. The more I spend time on the outline actually writing out sentences, the better, because it's just copy and paste. And then that's the rough draft. But before I ever get to the rough draft, I have an opportunity to see what the essay looks like and to see where I need information. So I obviously need information there. When I do this part, I'm a big highlighter, you all. So I just highlight it in pink to let me know that I needed to do that. Apollo 11, I'm not going to put a picture of Apollo 11 because this isn't an essay about Apollo 11. It's an essay about music. So this one was a factor. As I learned, I didn't know that this was such a big factor. This is the last concert that the Beatles performed, and that was on January the 30th of 1969. I didn't realize what an impact that had, and that was really interesting for me to learn that, so I popped it in here, and I think it is important. Okay, next is in the definitions, is the masterful marketing. And I'm not sure that I put that in the right place. Let me see. Hold on. Let's pause here and look at the thesis statement so that I don't confuse you as I move through the rest of this outline. I know, could it be a longer sentence? But, you know, it's a detailed essay. So there's 6 sections of the essay, right? All right, first we look at what can be measured. The facts that can be measured. And then we go into the theory, which takes us beyond the practical knowledge of how much it cost, how many people went, how much did it, who played, what was the order of music, all that kind of stuff only goes so far. And then in order to create a theory, that's wrong. Hold on. And that comes from the book, The Tipping Point. Why did I use that? Well, you know, I heard about that book a while back. I read it several years ago, and it talks about how how an event, how a product, how anything can hit that point where it becomes an epidemic. An epidemic doesn't always mean a bad thing. It means it just catches, it's trending. Or it's, what's the word for it when you go viral. Okay. So this is the tipping point, which is another word for all of that. And that contains 3 different factual bases. The law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. So the reader knows that the first 3 sections of the essay are going to be the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context. Presents an explanation of Woodstock, the unexpected cataclysmic success of the most influential cultural event of the 20th century, a symphony of mystical intuition, Western esoteric principles, and spirituality. So they know that my theory is going to be a symphony of mystical intuition, Western esoteric principles, and spirituality. So that thesis sentence outlines each of the sections of the essay. Let's go back to that multiple page view. Okay, so that's the essay, and of course I've inserted the graph because the reader is going to see this cataclysmic success and say, what does that mean? And of course, I'm going to expect that the writer of the essay is going to explain that to me right away, because as the reader, I'm going to be confused. And that's why we have the chart. All right, moving on. Another wonderful benefit of the outline is to see why things like this happen. I am not sure why I put the masterful marketing in 1969 here in the definition of terms. Am I trying to just show how difficult it was to get word out to these people, to get everybody the word? I go into it a lot more detail later on. I'm going to highlight this because I'm not sure. Maybe it'll make sense to me later on. See what I do with an outline? I absolutely have it there so that I can easily come back and look at things that I'm not sure about. I'm just putting it in gray. Okay. Moving on. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I know I need to look at it later. Okay, this is the law of the few. And for the law of the few, we have to have A, the connector who knows everybody. B, the maven who always is connected to ways to help. And C, the salespeople. That is the essence of the law of the few. So in the knows everyone category, we've got more than one person. We've got Michael Lang, but I need to add that because as I'm going, I'm learning. I learn about the guy who was the announcer, and as it turns out, that was the guy who knew everyone, who booked the bands and who was on stage and was one of the announcers. And I just learned that a couple days ago. So, and that's talent coordinator John Morris. I'm going to go ahead and put that in pink also because I need to just put in a wee tiny bit of explanation about him. He gets so much more into detail later on. But that's the law of the few, and I'm going to put those two people under the connector. Then the maven, who always knows what to do, would be the friend Artie Kornfeld, and this is his role. Okay, that's just a little introduction to these people. And because what we have to have is the law of the few. I'm not writing the entire essay. I'm looking at exactly what fits in with the format that has already been given to me in the book, The Turning Point. Okay, so then we have the stickiness factor, and the stickiness factor is what makes it kick, what makes it go. And this is where I go more into the whole poster situation. The poster situation comes up 3 times in the essay. Once briefly in the introduction and the definition of terms. It comes in here, and then it comes in in my theory. So I had to take all the information I learned about this poster and break it up into 3 partitions. 1, the very first mention of it in that definition of terms. 2, over here where we're looking at the stickiness factor and now I know why I did what I did. This is the stickiness factor, which is this poster, because I already established up in here that, this is fine, that the whole point of the thing was there was no way to get the word out to people. There was a way, but it's very limited. There weren't very many radio stations. The ARPANET hadn't even launched until October of that year, and that was only one computer talking to the other computer. It was impossible to get word out, and yet this happened. So that was the reason that I mentioned it up there in the definition of terms, and now we mention it again here. It's a huge factor, and this was the original poster, and I think it's a neat side-by-side comparison. And so that's the stickiness factor, is the making it, getting it out there. I'll have to see if I have this factor of Western esoteric spirituality, which I need to sort of mention here. And that is that, yes, it is true that it was hard to get the word out. So how did the word get out? And I read or watched one of Michael Lang's tutorial, or one of his things on YouTube, and he said, we were just wandering around going, where are the kids? How are we going to find the kids? And he would go into, towns and just, where are these people? How do I get these people? Imagine in 1969, no cell phones, no internet, no email, no nothing. You are where you are standing. And there's not that huge of a concept of the world outside, really. You have the people in front of you, and you have where you're standing. And you have a newspaper. You can put a little article in a newspaper, and that's what they did with the underground newspapers. And they didn't put an ad in the newspaper and pay for that until the day before the concert. So, poster becomes very important, doesn't it? Because you've got people handing out flyers. I knew about it, and I was in Norman, Oklahoma. And so, there's that. Then we have the power of context. I don't know what he's doing there. He does not belong there. All right. So the power of context. The power of context is when it happened. When did this happen? What was going on at the same time this was happening? A war, assassinations, some good things also. But, Apollo 11 was a good thing. And lots of things going on. It was just the world was upside down. Okay, now we come down to the essence of the essay, which is my theory. So I want to make sure that this is in balance, because the background information, the tipping point, the facts are the facts. But now we come into the theory of, okay, that the facts would explain a crowd of perhaps the aisle of whatever it is size. It might explain a crowd like this given the build up to where it was. But it does not explain how. This is a huge amount of people. Okay, so we get into my theory. And what I did for my theory, and I want to leave here for just a minute and go over and show you how I come up with a theory. Y'all, I don't want you to be shocked. This is just the way I do it. It may or may not be the way you do it, but this is how I roll, and I've always rolled this way, and I'm going to show it to you. First, I always start by certainly, absolutely knowing that I don't know anything. And so I think, what is it that I do know? I don't know. What is it that I know? What words do I know in the theoretical world? And I start with, okay, well, there's karma and dharma. And so I research those. I just go to Google and I type in that. And whatever I'm reading, I'm looking for a word or something to build on. And so I find this. And I type that. And that takes me to an article that talks about the Gnostic church. I don't know what that is. So I go and I find this person. And this person talks about what this Gnostic church is. And I learn enough to learn that we're really not talking about this. But in that article that I read, I find out this phrase, mystical or esoteric insight. Ooh, now we're going all age of Aquarius, and I like that. So I type in the words mystical or esoteric insight, and it takes me to the principles of esoteric spirituality. Ooh, now I'm getting somewhere. This all takes an hour. And I just start with, what is it that I know? And sometimes I think I don't know anything, but I'll come up with a word. And then I'm just looking to find something. Okay, so now I find this article about the principles of course it's spelled wrong. I know. And then I find this article that was written by Greer, and he describes mystical intuition and insights are the heart of esoteric spirituality. I love it. This article that I find very quickly on is spoken in very understandable language. Sometimes you get into some of these articles and they try to sound so highfalutin and like, oh my goodness, don't I know everything? I can't stand those articles. I put them in my works cited, but I generally don't use them because it's just somebody trying to see how smart they can look. I like somebody that writes a straightforward, tell me what it is. So he tells me what it is. And now I think about that. Then I talk to a friend of mine who went to the Santa Monica University, which is a spiritual psychology. And I'm just kicking tires with her, and we're talking about the elements that are this festival. And there's the music, obviously. There are the people. There are the townspeople. And then there's some entity that is keeping everybody from dying. And so she mentions a course that she took that had to do with the deeper eye. And then I get to the deeper I, and the deeper I takes me on to mystical spirituality, where I end up with this fantastic book that's a free book. I'll show it to you. It's this article, which is a free Google book. And I open it up and I go, oh man, it's all cut off. This is terrible. And then, all right, and then I come to this. It's all written in easy, presentable sentences. It's just so perfect for everything I'm doing. And I want to show you something that's really important about finding little gems like this. I found little parts of it and I copy it and I pop it into the introduction. I popped it into the definition of terms. I popped it in everywhere because this is page after page of wonderful material. And did I go through all 402 pages? No. I went through enough where I got the information that I needed. But I want to show you something really important. In this chapter, there's a quote included from St. Augustine. So I hear students say, what if I have a quote within another work? How do I quote a quote within a quote? Well, you can't, because who's to say that this is the actual words of St. Augustine? So it's pretty simple. I would just take this and I would put it into the search bar and see if I could find it. But then I have to think, okay, do I want to do that? Is this, I did that with several items, not from this book, from another book. They were quotes from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And I went and found that poem. It took 2 seconds to go find the actual poem that it came from, because I can't quote within a quote within a quote. I have to find out where that quote came from, or, most importantly, use something else. Now, if you've gone with me to the heavy side layer, and you can see that we're all up in spiritual principles, if you look at each one of these sentences, by intuition, I mean the intuition of the mystic, not the lower intuition, which is blind instinct. Every one of these sentences are little pearls. So now I have to select which little pearls do I want to include in my essay. Obviously, I'm not going to cut and paste 402 pages, and the words that I use, the sentences that I use, need to be in there to prove a point. So I want to look at this sentence right here. It is said to be the essential characteristic of genius to find resemblances between things apparently most unlike, in other words, blah, blah. So it's this problem right here. Who says it's said? Now, do I want to spend a good hour of my day trying to figure out who it is or what it is? I don't, because this entire book has one sentence after another that tells the same thing from the writer's point of view. Watkin, not it is said. And so I'm going to save myself a ton of heartache and just move right on past that to what the writer says. You see the difference? By intuition, I mean that's his words. I'm quoting him. I'm not quoting this, it is said. So I look out for that. There's one last thing on this, and then I'm going to move on, because I just want to not put too fine a point on this. But here's another statement. This notion of a scale of being ascending upwards to the one God in proportion to its increasing unification of an increasing manifold is corroborated by the teaching of Mr. Bradley's philosophy of the absolute. Mr. Bradley finds in this increased unification of an increased multiplicity, blah, 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 blah. Do I want to find Mr. Bradley? Do I want to figure out I can take part of this and I could go to Google and put it in there and hope to find him? But in a book that's got 402 pages of pearls of wisdom, I just don't need it. So I skip right on past it. I only go to what the writer is saying because I simply don't want to take the time. If it was the only quote I could ever find anywhere that actually says what I needed to say, then yes, I would go and find it. Here's their little footnote, and I'd go and search for it. But in this essay, for my purposes, I have plenty of words from the author, and I don't need any of this. Back to the outline. As you can see in the outline, I've only added images where I put this one together. I thought that was cool, really cool finding this. It's the dot theory. I know, I love it too. Where, you know, the writer describes where as children, people sit with the little connect the dots thing, you know, and you don't know what it's going to make a picture of, and then all of a sudden you can see that it's a zebra and you can see that it's a giraffe or whatever. And so I created a little dot to dot here. I thought that turned out pretty well. And so I only included images here that relate to that. And here we come back to the poster again. And remember, this is the third time we are talking about the poster. And this time, I'm going to really bring the point home. And the point is this. The original poster I already showed you. This poster came to be because the producers got together and thought the initial poster looked too psychedelic. And remember, they're relying on this poster to do everything. It's the poster, the poster, the poster. And so they, John Morris goes to hire an artist, and he nor anybody else can quite figure out how it came to be that he found this artist. But this artist is only told the 3 words of the, what I call the mission statement. 3 days of peace and music. End of story. That's the mission statement. Not 3 days of making tons of money. Not 3 days of what, that's the mission statement. So he is inspired by Matisse to do cutouts. And so he gets a red piece of paper, he cuts out these forms, and he puts them on the page. And then, of course, you're handing out a flyer. Who can read this? This lineup of bands. All you see is this and the mission statement, really. So now, what's the deal with how does this fit into the spiritual, airy-fairy kind of place where we have found ourselves? Well, because when Matisse, these are all out of place. When Matisse got old and became crippled with arthritis, he discovered that he could, if somebody helped him, he could get his fingers through the little tiny scissors. Like the little, remember the little round scissors in elementary school? Like those little scissors. And so he created his cutouts. And it was one of his greatest periods. And it was like he would not be stopped. He was not going to be stopped, no matter what got in his way. And I think that that's symbolic, and I think it shows in the poster without the artist necessarily knowing, without anybody planning or calculating or doing a focus group or anything else. They just, I think that's interesting, and I think it fits in with the through line. So then we have 3, the spiritual element. So we had the 3 sections. Remember, go back to the thesis statement. The 3 sections are the mystical, intuitive. And then the second section is the deeper I. And the third section is the spiritual element. And then I make my point, which I think is quite good. Overwritten, of course. But I'll go back and carefully decide what to edit from this because it's kind of pretty. And then I come down here to my conclusion. And the conclusion, as you can see, I haven't underwritten the conclusion. I think the conclusion is pretty good. Maybe it's going to be 2 paragraphs, but I don't care. It's a longer essay, and I like sections. You may not, and you don't have to do sections. I do, because I don't ever want my reader to be confused. I don't want my reader to never know where they are. I want them to always know where they are in the essay. They can always go right back up here to the thesis statement and see exactly where they are in my essay. And that is why I like subtitles. It's not required, but in a long essay, how are you, the reader's following along, But if they have to leave and come back to it, I want them to know exactly where they are in this essay. So it's going to have these, and I know that if I was writing a master's thesis, then I would have a committee. And the committee on my master's thesis team would sort of help dictate to me the format for my master's thesis or my dissertation. They might say you can or cannot have images. They might say you have to do everything in chapters. They might say you can't have headings that are centered in the middle of the page. This, that, this, and that. But MLA format always says this is the suggested format, but you will do whatever the director, your instructor, the director, your committee, whatever they say to do. So things aren't just hard and fast in that world. And I just like subtitles. I just like to know where the reader is. And then, so in the conclusion, and I decided, remember when we found this pretty image, and I thought, I don't know where I'm going to put it. But and again, I may change my mind as this goes on, but I really like this for a capsulation, because the last statement of the essay should wrap up everything the essay had to say. So going back to this theory page that I created that started with me knowing a word and moved right on down to this. And the same thing happens for you. I promise you it does. You just think, what's one word? And then you click to the next word. And this internet is fantastic for this. Oh my gosh, back in the days when it was going through card catalogs and making a Xerox copy, if you could. And, oh, this is just heaven. It's heaven for a writer. And so you can see where I built it. I built that theory in here, and then I transported it over to the outline. And then I'll come back over here to edit and make my points, and then I have the conclusion elsewhere. I don't like to do this, just by the way. It makes it too hard for the reader to read. I don't mind the image being to the left or right, but I don't want the reader to have to jump over the image to read something. I don't like it. Confuses the reader. Okay, so now let's look at my other pages of research, and then we'll be done. These are my notes about facts. Yes, you can see that. I just copied and pasted. I know where it came from, and I'll decide later whether I need it or not. But when I'm researching, I'm just throwing stuff over in my notes. And it's not as scientific as I might like it to be, but it just is what it is. I have to know what the order of things were in the legacy. So this is just some facts. This is some images from some of the videos. I just copy and paste, knowing where it came from in case I need to do that. So this is my factual page. This isn't up into the spiritual. This is just where I go to find my actual facts. If I use it in the essay, I highlight it and color it so that I never go back and use it again. It makes life real simple. And I try to do these some behind the scenes. This was interesting, and some of this information was important. But you can see where I just went through, and it doesn't take very long. This was the poster information, and I didn't know the poster was going to be important. But the more I get into it and I realize how hard it was to get the word out, the more I realize the poster is very important. So that's this page of facts. And I just did that. So next, I watched some of the documentaries and some of the YouTube things. This is a beautiful little CVS evaluation, which took place on 8/18/69. He says some lovely things. I haven't used it yet, but I haven't forgotten about it. And this is just says such neat things about how this fits into the sign of the times. It was just a lovely little special report. And I thought it was really... And while such a spectacle may never happen again, it has recorded the growing proportions of this youthful culture in the mind of adult America. See what I mean? I just think it's just lovely. I don't know how I happened upon it. Could not tell you. I get over into YouTube and I ask a question to YouTube, and there's no telling what all's going to come up. This is from a YouTube source called Woodstock and Back Again. And I marked down the things. I don't know if you know how to do this, so let me show you real quickly over in YouTube. I'm just showing an example. You see the little CC means that we're going to have a transcript. So you just go down to these three little dots. Here. Hold on. You just do the three dots, open the transcript, and the transcript will show up over here with a timestamp. So you can do the whole transcript, or you can find what you need and just copy that. And then, of course, you'll want to cite the YouTube channel. I had a lot of dickens of a time with these YouTubes getting them to find in EasyBib, so I just got really used to creating the citations by hand. But that's how a YouTube video can be used. Back to the notes. This is a short YouTube video, and I didn't do timestamps on it because I don't know how much of this I'm going to use, and I don't want my reader to have to stop so much and look at a timestamp in a video that's only 2 minutes long. It takes their time. It needs to be in something that's longer for it to be worth my time to do that. Okay. Then this is something I use, and y'all, why are some things highlighted green and some things are highlighted blue? I don't know. It's just that I know that I used it, so I highlight it with something. I don't spend that much time. I know that I used it somewhere. I don't organize that directly. Okay, so this is another one that I used. This is a director's cut, which is a long deal, and what I should have done is sat down to watch that movie with my laptop and just paused the movie and typed in the timestamp and what happened. But instead, I hand wrote it on paper and scribbled and scrawled, and it's frustrating. So I'm learning just like everybody else. Sometimes I do notes and I think, oh my gosh, I've just done such a great job. And then sometimes I think, why did I add this extra work for myself when I could have just sat there with I have a perfectly good laptop. I can actually speak into it. And, so anyway, but that's that. Now, one of my important things about this goes over into the spirituality. It goes into the facts. It goes into everything. And that is crowd control. When you look at the people that are here and you think, why do they not freak out? You all, I don't like being in a crowded elevator. It makes me a little bit edgy. Can I imagine being on it's incredible how people, not only through the music, but through the crowd control, and where it moves up into the spiritual, is that the music is so perfectly laid out to just when you think the crowd is going to go, a little haywire, a band comes on. Not the band that was scheduled, not even close to the band that was scheduled, but the band who was there. I find that to be incredible. That cannot be just happenstance. When you consider that the number of people there did not rush the stage or have a mass riot or anything like that. So we have John Morris, who's one of the stage announcers, Chipmunk, and I haven't completed my research on him, and Wavy Gravy, the kind of eclectic sort of person. And then this is from an interview. So these are a lot of interviews in here, quotes from people. And this is one that I use. So an incredible fact of the concert is security. Most of the concerts during that era were having lots of police problems, tear gas, arrests, lots of problems. And I intend to make a little chart, a little picture chart that shows the security team for Miami and the security team for some other one. And then this guy, Wavy Gravy, who was the spokesperson for, and they called themselves the Please Force, where they'd say, please, will you sit over there? It was very interesting. And this is one of the stage announcers, and I have a little bit of stuff on him so far. But you can see where when I need something, I can come over here and find it, and I can pop that into the outline. So this was from documentaries, whether it's on YouTube or the film. Next, and finally, is this documentary. It's a freebie on Netflix right now, and I think they did such a good job. And there are so many quotes from people who were actually there. And these need to be peppered in through the essay so that not everything is coming from the the spiritual world, or not everything's coming from statistics and stats and that sort of thing. But I really love Richie Havens initially thought, hey man, don't put me in front of your problem. But it was beautiful. I know it's misspelled, but if I use it, I'll fix it. But it was beautiful, and I did 5 encores. And the song Freedom was created on stage on the spot. Now there was nobody there. Nobody could show up. Nobody could get to the venue. And they hadn't even gotten the helicopter situation going to get people in. And Richie Havens was early because he lived in the town. Well, he lived in the town close by. And they just said, would you please go on and start the show? We're behind. They were starting late. And he was like, my bass player isn't even here. And got the crowd all mellowed, got the crowd all in the vibe that was created. It was very interesting. So this is one of the most important parts. And of course, this is where I still need to go and finish this up by getting the biblical passage of feeding the, Jesus feeding fish to the masses, because there's no way, it can't be, it's impossible. There were 600,000 people, and the townspeople made 10,000 sandwiches. Tell me how that works. Okay, and then there's this. This is something that I want to say. This is what I want to make a point of. And there you go. This was my little Kent State thing where I went off. And this is to contrast the security, and I haven't used it yet. I just highlighted it so I could easily find it, because it's very important to show and not take for, this goes in the conclusion section. Of course, there won't be very much of it, but it's important to make that contrast. Okay, so I'm going to slowly move down this outline, and if you would like to pause the tutorial at any spot and take a closer look at how that outline is working, you are welcome to do so. So let's just go through this page at a time. I'm just going to show you how we started by placing things in large chunks. And this I added today, where I found that, and that wonderful book where I could just pop little pieces of it in here and there. Okay, and then the purpose of the essay. Again, this is all in the introduction, and I have to make a decision whether the introduction is going to be 2 paragraphs. I don't know. I need to kind of check on that. And there's the thesis statement. I underline it generally, which I don't know why I didn't do now. I always put it bold so that as I'm writing the outline, I can come back and go, where am I? Is everything in the right order? And then the definition section, and this is the transition statement. An understanding of the elements that combine together to create a bonanza of this magnitude requires an analysis of the dream, the signs of the times, and masterful marketing. That's the definition section. So this was the transition sentence that leaves the outline, the introduction, and moves on. And there's the dream, and there's the chart, unless we decide to move it somewhere different. Some of the stuff, it still bothers me that I have this. What difference does that make? I just don't think I think the chart and the graph takes the place of needing to put in a lot of those stats. Don't you? There's no point to put in anything that isn't necessary to the theory. Okay. Signs of the time. And why was 1969 the perfect time for a unified cultural event? And this is way overwritten. I realize that. And I'll go back and I will trim it down so that the reader simply gets a taste for the flavor. And that's an important fact. This is a, mention, and this is an important image because I did not realize the impact that that had. It was a time of mourning for people. I'm sort of into other things besides the Beatles at that point. But anyway, so then marketing in 1960. I'm going to put the challenges. That's going to help me not, since it's definition of terms. All right, keeps me from being confused. And you can see that I went ahead and cited everything when I put it in here, so I don't have to go back and go, where did that come from? I'm still going to probably find something in here that I go, where did that come from? But I try very hard to go ahead and add wherever I have to fill this out, so we got this in pink. Always connected, arties, or so. This was the, and look where it is, page 21. Find that interesting. It just fascinates me. Okay, salespeople get the money for the product. And then I just want to take something else from that book and put it in here to show the stickiness factor. Because part of that is, it's what made it stick, what made it so popular, what made everybody continue to come. Packaging marker. This is the first mention of the poster. Power of context. Okay. Then my theory, which is the whole point of the entire essay. So we've taken this amount of time laying out the logical basis for my theory. And now I need to rock and roll with my theory. And that is message, subject, market, poster. Okay, that's, again, overwritten. I realize, how could such an event be considered? Oh, need it. That's one of the things when I overwrite and I come through the outline, I can see what I needed to do. Okay. I like this section. I remember doing this and I really liked it. Okay, and now I kind of break out of the outline because I've already written the content, and it all has to do with the anthropological aspect of the. Okay. And then we have Greer's wonderful article. It's not even that long, and it's a summary of the book that he wrote, but he writes the summary, so yay! Okay, so. I love that the dots thing. I think that's so important. I don't know where the picture went that goes there, but it's the one that I created side by side where the dots all connect. I like that. Now we have the deeper I, which includes, the deeper I is the people in the audience who don't freak out, the townspeople who had formed a barrier by standing, their own protest. They stood at the little road to Max Yasgur's farm, which was the only road in, and they all joined hands in protest before the concert. And the kids just parked their cars and politely walked past him and said hi. And so these are the same people who then, there it is, not completely out of place, but all right. This much cannot be explained. The deeper I. This is me explaining my idea of the deeper I, and then I have this, which is another, was just terrific. as a place to prove my point. Okay. You get all that. You've probably done that before in essays that you've written. Okay. I have quotes from him. I have stuff in my own words. There's the poster again, and this is where we're talking about the poster and the whole concept of the poster. And there aren't very many pink spots, as you can see in the outline, that have to be filled in, so I feel like I'm not terribly overwhelmed because I don't know what this sentence is supposed to say, but I'll make it pink. So I know I need to figure out what point I was making there. But I feel like I'm not overwhelmed because I've written the theory here, and I've written the conclusion. I have to do this. I've just got to go in pink. This is right here is where I make the connection, the biblical connection. That's one of the neat things I like about doing a spiritual theory, because the spiritual theory can encompass all sorts of different concepts and stories and parables and all that kind of thing. It's just the sky's the limit with spirituality, and I really like that. I like this little connection too between the trash and this man. He's very important. Okay, so it's all written out. Now when I edit, it's nicely overwritten, so I can, trim it down, and then here's my conclusion. I put this together myself. I think it really draws a connection because this man, the porta sand scene, is really the crux of the whole thing. At first I went, what are you even talking about? Somebody had said it in one of the things that they'd written. And I thought, that's the silliest thing I ever heard in my life. And then I looked at it and I went, it really is true. It really is true. That little scene absolutely encompasses the whole thing. So there's my final point, and I like this. I saw eternity the other night like a great ring of pure endless light, all calm as it was bright, and round beneath it time and hours, days, years, driven by spheres like a vast shadow moved. Oh, lofty. Okay, so that's the outline, and the next time I log in, it will be to show you the rough draft. That concludes this tutorial. Thanks, y'all, for watching all this.